As I think about the assignments you've had at the European Commission, international cooperation, humanitarian aid, crisis response, environmental economist when you first joined the World Bank, it's hard to believe a person was better prepared to unfortunately face this crisis that we have faced today. And I'd like to start with just one word: collaboration. At the Milken Institute, beginning in February, we changed the focus of all of our 10 centers at our medical foundations and my family foundations to focus on the coronavirus, and broke our efforts into 6 parts: education, prevention, testing, treatment, control leading to cure, and economic and financial safety nets. I'd like you to take us on a journey of the most unusual cooperation that has ever occurred worldwide, that you are seeing from an economic standpoint between all these organizations you have headed and worked, how you're working together as a team, and the speed of response. On the medical side, I would say to you, in 5 decades of my own focus, this is the greatest level of cooperation ever between public and private, between bioscience companies, large pharma, small biotech, government agencies, sharing data, sharing information. Take us on a journey to the organizations that you have headed, worked on, and today the IMF and its response over the past few months.
Well, the crisis we face is truly a crisis like no other. And I can tell you, every single day, I bring forward everything I have learned in my previous positions. Front and center is that we cannot overcome this crisis unless we come together. And that means for us at the IMF, of course, bring all shareholders of the IMF, all 189 governments together, but also make sure that we think of private sector solutions, and therefore we reach out for the ideas that private sector generates and solutions that it offers. Make sure that we have the active civil society engaged. And since you asked me what is the most unusual in this particular crisis, the most unusual for us is that we partner with epidemiologists and their modeling to make our macroeconomic projections. Never has been done before in the history of the IMF. And that bringing everybody together is paramount because of the high degree of uncertainty we face. I know from my work as a crisis commissioner that to succeed, you really have to, pray for the best, but prepare for the worst. And we absolutely have to do it in this crisis. We need to think of the upside of a scientific solution that comes fast with vaccine and treatment, but we also have to be ready to recover, to build the economy upwards, even if this solution is not yet in hands. And if I were to project for us at the IMF, where we are coming from, where we are headed, first and foremost, focus on people, on their health, on the vulnerable parts of the economy, make sure they are first in line to be protected. For this, we have done an unbelievable deployment. Never ever in our history we have provided so many lifelines at the same time. In 7 weeks, 70 countries received financial support from the IMF. And as we are looking forward, what you talked about, this unity of purpose of institutions, the private sector, the energy and innovation that comes bottom up from people, this is what is going to take us forward. So for us, what it means is we have thrown a very open door to have external input in what we do. And the most interesting so far has been what we have achieved on debt moratorium. We brought everybody together so poor countries stop serving their debts for the duration of this crisis where their economies are at standstill. Unbelievably fast, and it only came because of this unity of purpose.
Kristalina, what we've seen here in just the medical area, the response of government agencies such as the FDA and others, responding in a matter of days, not a matter of months or years today, and also providing guidance. Could you give us a feeling of how you've shortened the decision process? You've talked about 70 actions in a short period of time, but some of them have required cooperation with the World Bank or the European Commission and other organizations. Have you been holding regular sessions with these other leadership groups?
We definitely changed the modus operandi very quickly. For us at the fund, a very accelerated process of decision making that is tuned to the speed of response necessary, reaching out to everybody. We have regular meetings with the development banks. I have regular calls. Actually, in fact, I just got off the phone talking to David Malpass, the president of the World Bank. We are also bringing on issues like Africa, how we can help a continent that has been on the move, and now it may lose momentum by bringing everybody, of course, the Africans themselves first and foremost, but everybody that can contribute and keep attention to the objectives we have set up for development. So yes, there is a dynamism that I haven't seen before because there is no other way to deal with the crisis. But can I say, kind of a hat up to what governments have done, response like no other. I have never seen such a strong, massive, phenomenal action on the monetary policy side and on the fiscal side. We have on the monetary policy side, central banks stepping up with everything they have, cutting interest rates, increasing asset purchasing, $6 trillion of new asset purchasing. And on the fiscal side, we are coming close to $11 trillion of fiscal measures to put a floor under the economy. If that didn't happen, we would have had massive bankruptcies and possibly structural unemployment for a long time to come. So yes, I take pride of what we do at the IMF, and we actually have been calling for this massive action. But I want to recognize that we are in this unusual time. You're stepping up like never before. Governments are stepping up like never before. And institutions like mine are stepping up like never before.
So, Kristalina, I want to give you the next word, AI. So everyone around the world, and we're moving more and more to a digital world, we're going to excuse me, we're going to analyze all the data and tell us what's going to happen. But your leadership and everyone else's leadership has changed the course of history. Okay, this is what could happen, and our goal has to make sure it didn't happen. So let's get to the next word, collateral damage. You started as an environmental economist at the World Bank. You've been a leader in the focus on the environment and the society we live in. You've just mentioned Africa, which potentially holds the growth for the entire net growth of the world's population and the balance of the century. You, in January, spoke about more than 170 or so economies growing. And today we see more than 170 economies not growing any longer, but now declining. What is the collateral damage that you're concerned about and that you're addressing today in these areas?
Right. Well, the first and foremost recognition we have to give is that now, today, we know more about the scale and scope of this crisis. And unfortunately, we are going to come up with our updated projections. The downturn is going to be more severe, and the recovery is going to be slower than we anticipated in April. And we also know that some of the measures that are taken to put a floor under the economy will have longer term unintended or undesirable consequences. Higher debt, we already are projecting highest debt levels in a long time, higher deficits, and obviously these are problems to be addressed. The fact that there is so much liquidity helps countries, helps companies, but it is leading to asset valuation up and up and risk appetite up and up. That is something that we have to be watching very carefully, because if there is a shock of some kind and then we see bankruptcies, especially in the corporate sector on the larger scale, that could push us backwards in a very dramatic manner. When I think of these risks, I'm also very mindful of the collateral opportunity. Let me put it, you're talking about collateral damage. But I also, to me, the biggest collateral damage would be if we slip through a huge opportunity to shift gear in our economies and our societies for the better. And what I mean is, one, we know, you said it, digital, big winner of this crisis. Is this going to be a winner for few, but not for everybody? If this is the case, we're digging a big collateral damage called growing inequality and lack of access to opportunities. Are we going to build back, in other words, the economy as it was before the crisis, anemic growth, low productivity, climate crisis looming, or we will build forward? We would create incentives for low carbon, climate resilient, environmentally sustainable growth, job rich and environmentally sustainable. So that, to me, to finish on your question, the biggest collateral damage would be our complacency. But I believe in you, I believe in people around you, I believe we are not going to allow this to happen. So maybe you can give me some assurances, Mike. You can say, yes, Kristalina, don't worry, not going to happen.
I don't think any of us want to let that happen. As you pointed out, these issues of inequality were rising long before the coronavirus and the concern. One of the things that brings me hope is the recognition of what is an important job. Is it the person that's providing food? Is it the person that is handling distribution? And so I hope that as we look at jobs, we will look at them differently. And as we focus on infrastructure and growth, as you've pointed out, creating this infrastructure, digital infrastructure around the world is exceedingly important. So you gave us a little peek at the report that is coming out shortly. And your answer is slower growth than we expected. and longer time for a recovery. Are there things that the private sector could do that you would call on us, many of the viewers today, to respond to?
Well, the private sector is the job creator and the job protector. What I do hope is to see more attention to using the instruments governments are putting in place to protect jobs. But in this month, we have to start thinking about a recovery in which some sectors are going to be affected more than others. We know hospitality, tourism, transport, more affected. Jobs may be lost for a longer period of time. So we have to gear towards a recovery in which perhaps we concentrate on generating jobs where there is a likelihood of faster recovery. So private sector certainly, by deploying investments in the next months and years, can help. It can help tremendously with reskilling, upskilling of workers, and it can help tremendously by adopting a longer term outlook in which factors like sustainability and inclusion matter equally to profitability. That has been, private sector has been on this journey already. And my call to you is, do not abandon it. If we want to have dynamic economies, they have to be inclusive. We have to turn around the corner on inequality, especially inequality of opportunities. Mike, just one example. Every single day, 400,000 children are born on this planet. They don't choose their race, they don't choose their gender, they don't choose geography, they don't choose whether they are born in a rich family or a poor family. In other words, it's kind of a lottery at the start, but it needn't be a lottery for the future. There has to be clear thinking around equality of opportunity, access to education, to financing, to jobs. So we actually tap in the potential of all these people. And when we tap in the potential of everybody, private sector knows what happens. Then we have higher productivity, higher profitability. But we need you to be a strong partner in thinking about these issues and acting with your, with your investments, with the messaging that you send to your workers, to society. Stay on that message in your interest.
Yeah, I think we're all focused on that, and I believe that is our mission, and I really appreciate the issue you've raised here. As people point out, the children that are being born in the world today and the opportunities that we have to make available to them. And my feeling is this worldwide crisis is a wake-up call for all of us. As we look at responsibilities. So as the viewers think about what is the World Bank's responsibilities, what are the IMF's responsibilities, what are the European Commission, how do you break down the leadership in these different areas?
So we do have our mandates, and it is very important that we are the best in what we are mandated to do. For the IMF, it is financial stability, growth, employment, and to have that, we care very deeply about trade. We care very deeply about integration in the world today and in the future. For the World Bank, the focus is development and poverty eradication. Clearly, what we do and what they do connects. There would be no growth if there is no financial stability, or if there is very high unemployment, or if we get into fragmentation and global trade collapses. For the European Commission, the issue is, first and foremost, to keep the European Union strong, and also to play a constructive, positive role in the world. What unites all three of us is global solidarity, international cooperation for the sake of everybody being better off, but also not to leave countries and people to fall so behind that it is devastating for them and their families, and they have no option but to turn possibly to very bad choices, terrorism, or putting their lives at risk. So we have a unity of purpose among all these institutions, and I'm so incredibly lucky that I have seen each and every one of them from inside, so we can build this cooperation even stronger.
So, as you know, Kristalina, in the 1980s, many of the emerging countries had borrowed, particularly in US dollars, and the weakness of their currencies put them in a very difficult period, and the payments on those currencies. How has the IMF and others responded in this crisis?
Well, let me stress that countries have learned a painful lesson. A vast majority of emerging markets have built strong fundamentals. They have reserves, they have sound macroeconomic and monetary policies, and it shows in this crisis. Remember, in March, there was panic that markets are closing on emerging economies, no access or very high yields. But because of these strong fundamentals, once there was more liquidity in advanced economies, emerging markets returned very effectively, and they're issuing even more so they can boost their economies, protect their people in this crisis. And what we are saying is very simple. This rule, in good times, build your strength for bad times, it has proven to be right, and we hope more countries would do that. And then we have some economies that are either under significant debt distress, or they're very fragile for reasons often not of their making, because of wars, because of natural disasters. For these economies, what is paramount is that we and the World Bank and others are there for them today, that we provide financial lifelines at a scale to stabilize them in the face of this crisis. But also we need to recognize that there would be some countries that will have to look at their debt levels and take steps to debt restructuring. We all know there are countries already doing it, like Argentina, Ecuador. There would be some others that would have to go through this process. And what I'm praying and actually turning to our audience is that we would all have the maturity to act in a responsible manner to make sure that these economies go to that sustainability and they can stay there, they can grow. And that we do that with a clear understanding that disorderly defaults very bad for everybody. If we didn't do the stabilization and macro policies, the risk of these disorderly defaults today would have been much, much, much higher. But it is not, and yet it is not zero. So our policy engagement is very strong everywhere, but it is particularly focused on the countries that are more vulnerable. The same way people with preconditions are more vulnerable to the virus, weaker economies are more vulnerable to the economic shock we experience today, so they need more of our help.
Kristalina, I think one of the things you've seen over the decades is really a dramatic improvement in the sophisticated leadership of countries around the world. That has been, and so you're dealing with a much different environment today than you might have dealt during the financial crisis of 08, 2010. Also, your resources and your leadership under your leadership at the IMF are quite different today and substantially larger. Could you kind of give us a feel of what the resources you have today versus what they would have been a decade ago?
Well, the membership of the IMF was very smart. After the global financial crisis, they quadrupled our lending capacity. In 2007, the fund had $250 billion, and then the crisis hit, and it was obvious that that was insufficient for major shocks. Today, we have 1 trillion. Out of this 1 trillion, we have deployed so far 250 billion, of which a fraction is for emergency assistance and also for cushions for well-performing economies. And actually, let me emphasize that 4 countries in Latin America, Mexico, Colombia, Chile, and Peru, have taken from the fund precautionary lending, access to a flexible credit line. Very smart move. Increase your buffers, your protection in this crisis. We still have 3/4 available to lend. We are very careful to not use it when not necessary. So when emerging markets have access to issuing bonds, of course, very good for them. It reduces the pressure on us, and it allows us to have that strong financial capacity. And I can say our membership is very clear. They will back us up if we need more. This is on the table open. But for now, the fund is really well resourced, and we work very closely with others, with other financial institutions. So when you look at the world today, it is a much more integrated in precautionary and in response capacity based on the lessons from the global financial crisis.
Let me turn to financial. And you studied in an economic university and traditional finance. So today we have 2 factors. One, the enormous involvement of both countries and agencies such as yourself, the record issuance of debt, interest rates very low. And on the other hand, we now have, as a partial result, surging equity markets around the world with more than $10 trillion of equity being created in terms of values. How do you reconcile this? And how do you think the future will deal with these issues?
So first, let me start from the good news. And the good news is that after the global financial crisis, the world's banking system was put on a sound footing. So when you look at the financial world, the banking system is stronger. I take pride. The IMF invented stress testing, so it is stress tested at a very high level of shock. Where we are concerned is in 2 places. One is the non-banking financial institutions. They are not subject to the same scrutiny and supervision. And even before the pandemic, we have started talking about, well, this part of the financial system is growing, 13, 14%, maybe more is there. Maybe we need to pay more attention. And now I would say, yeah, we need to pay more attention. And then comes asset valuation. And that asset valuation has gone almost where it was in January, whereas the real economy is falling way behind. Big source of it is the confidence that is provided by decisive actions of governments and central banks, not just the money. I mean, the money, very important because you have money to buy assets, but it is the confidence that there is a floor under the economy. We are concerned that should there be a slow scientific movement, you're right, we are all hopeful that it would be fast. But if it is not, and there is another wave of the pandemic, and then the risk of bankruptcies goes up, then we may have a dangerous situation. So what we are telling everybody is just be careful, watch it. The simple sentence here is, we are not out of the woods yet. My prediction is that there will be an adjustment in policies in a positive way. There would be more agility in public policy because now policymakers recognize there is uncertainty. So they would be appropriately shifting policy measures to direct more resources where they would be most helpful for recovery while the pandemic is still with us. But that is that, Mike. Not yet out of the woods. Be careful, watch it. It has gone, the divergence has opened up quite a lot. Stay vigilant.
So let me summarize some of the points you have made. One, our financial institutions and your efforts and others were probably at the strongest they ever were leading into the coronavirus, and that has served us well. Number two, efforts such as ours and the IMF to train financial experts in emerging markets, thousands, has made them better prepared and more sophisticated financially. Third, this is a wake-up call for the world that when we rebuild, we should build a fairer world. We should be focused on environmental opportunities, education, etc. And fourth, you've given us the wake-up call, which I heard from my father when I was a very young boy at 8, that if there isn't opportunity and hope, somewhat we define as the American dream, not necessarily the country, but the concept, that we can all succeed based on our ability and have equal opportunity, that it will not be a good world for all of us unless each person feels that way. And you've reminded us once again, and I thank you, of the quick response that you and others have led, and you've also reminded us of the 400,000 children born every day in the world, that we have to make sure they have hope and opportunity. And as you've seen in so many crises in your life, if people don't have hope, decisions they are making might be detrimental to all. So one, I want to thank you for your service for decades. Two, we are so thankful that you are in this position at this time at the IMF. And third, we hope that the optimism expressed by financial markets turns out to be true with either medical solutions or other opportunities. We wish you the best and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Mike.